Welcome to Rooted in Reason podcast, where faith meets thoughtful inquiry. And welcome back to our series, Did Jesus Exist?
Today, we're diving into a question that's absolutely central to understanding who Jesus was.
Okay.
Did he ever claim to be God? This is episode 3 in our series, and it's a question that sparked debate for centuries.
Yeah, it's interesting because you hear so many people even today saying, yeah, Jesus was a good guy, great teacher, maybe even a really important prophet.
Right.
He's often seen as this incredible moral example.
That's a perspective you hear a lot. And it's true that his teachings resonated deeply and continue to inspire many, but we want to really dig into something more specific, something that goes beyond just being a good teacher.
Right.
Did Jesus himself actually claim to be God?
Right.
Some people argue that he never explicitly said those exact words, "I am God, worship me."
And that's a fair point. You don't find that exact sentence in the Bible. So Our mission in this deep dive is to explore the evidence. Did Jesus believe he was God? And if so, how did he communicate that to his followers and to the people around him?
What's fascinating to consider right from the start is the idea that Jesus did claim to be God.
Okay.
But he did it in ways that would have been deeply meaningful to his original audience.
Sure.
Jewish people who had a rich understanding of their history, their scriptures, and the significance of God's own titles and actions. He wasn't speaking in a vacuum.
Okay, so let's jump right in.
Sure.
If Jesus thought he was God, why didn't he just say it directly? Why not just walk around saying, hey, I'm God? What's the reason behind a more indirect approach, if that's what it was?
That's a really sharp question. Think about it from Jesus's perspective as a Jewish teacher speaking to other Jewish people in the first century. They had a very specific understanding of God based on the Old Testament. He wasn't trying to introduce some completely new foreign concept out of nowhere instead. He often used their own language, their own sacred texts to reveal his identity. Things like referencing God's personal name, echoing prophecies they knew by heart, and demonstrating attributes that they understood belonged only to God.
That makes a lot of sense because if he had just come out and declared, I am God,
Right.
it could have been so easily misunderstood.
Right.
I mean, at that time, you had Roman emperors who were claiming to be divine.
Yeah.
Would have been a completely different cultural context.
Exactly. A blunt statement like that could have been interpreted in all sorts of ways that didn't align with who Jesus truly was and what he was trying to communicate. It might have been seen as just another political power play.
Right.
Or a claim to be some kind of earthly ruler playing at being a god like those Roman emperors.
So instead of that straightforward declaration you're saying, he communicated his divine identity in other ways that would have resonated more deeply with his Jewish listeners.
Precisely. And here's where it gets really interesting, because even though he didn't use that exact phrase, I am God, the evidence suggests that his claims were so clear to the religious leaders of the time that they actually accused him of blasphemy. Okay. Blasphemy in their understanding was claiming to be God, and they felt his words and actions crossed that line. They ultimately sought to have him killed for it.
Wow. So they definitely picked up on what he was implying, even if he wasn't saying it in the way we might expect.
Exactly.
Let's talk about one of those ways, the idea that Jesus took God's name for himself.
Okay.
That sounds incredibly significant.
It is in the Old Testament, in Exodus chapter 3, verse 14. We have this foundational moment where Moses asks God for his name, and God replies, I am. This I am, or Yahweh, in Hebrew was considered the most sacred name of God, so holy that observant Jews even avoided saying it aloud.
Right, that name carries so much weight in history. So how did Jesus connect himself to that name?
We'll look at John chapter 8, verses 58 and 59. Jesus says to them, before Abraham was born, I am. Now listen to the immediate reaction of the crowd. They picked up stones to throw at him.
Wow.
Why such an extreme reaction? It wasn't just about claiming to be older than Abraham in that context. Using the words I am was a direct echo of God's self-revelation to Moses. They understood exactly what he was claiming to be, one with the eternal God. That's why they considered it blasphemy, punishable by death, according to their understanding of the law.
That's a powerful connection. Just those two words, I am, in that specific context were enough for them to understand his claim.
Absolutely. And it's not just a one-off throughout the Gospel of John. Jesus uses this I am phrase repeatedly, but he follows it with different descriptions, different aspects of who he is. Like think about John chapter 6, verse 35, where he says, I am the bread of life. Or John chapter 8, verse 12, I am the light of the world. Then you have John chapter 10, verse 11, I am the good shepherd. John chapter 14, verse 6, I am the way and the truth and the life. And John chapter 11, verse 25, I am the resurrection and the life.
So it's like he's not just saying he can provide these things.
Yeah.
He's saying he is the very essence of them using the same divine I am that God used for himself.
Exactly. Each of these statements connects Jesus directly to roles and attributes that the Old Testament ascribes to God. He's not just offering light. He is the light that illuminates the world. He's not just guiding. He's the good shepherd, the one who lays down his life for the sheep, a clear reference to God's care for his people.
It's as if he's saying, everything you understand about God, I embody, I am that.
Right.
Now, the material also mentions that Jesus claimed to do things that only God can do.
Right.
What are some examples of that?
This is another key piece of the puzzle in Jewish belief. There were certain actions that were understood to be solely within God's power and authority.
Okay.
One of the most significant of these was the forgiveness of sins. Think about the story in Mark chapter 2, verses 5 through 7. Jesus heals a paralyzed man and says to him, "Son, your sins are forgiven."
Okay.
The reaction of the teachers of the law is immediate.
Right.
Why does this fellow talk like that? He's blaspheming. Who can forgive sins but God alone? They understood that forgiving sins was God's unique right.
And Jesus didn't correct them by saying, no, God forgives him.
Yeah.
He himself declared the sins forgiven on his own authority.
Precisely. He wasn't just announcing that God had forgiven the man. He was acting in God's place, demonstrating his own divine authority to pardon sin. This was a profound claim. Then consider Jesus speaking about the final judgment in Matthew chapter 25, verses 31 and 32. He says, "When the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the angels with him, he will sit on his glorious throne, all the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate the people one from another as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats."
Now, in the Old Testament, wasn't God always depicted as the ultimate judge of humanity? I'm thinking of passages like Joel chapter 3, verse 12.
You're absolutely right. The concept of God as the judge of all the earth is a consistent theme throughout the Old Testament. So when Jesus, referring to himself as the Son of Man, places himself on the throne of judgment, presiding over all nations, he's taking on a role that was understood to belong to God alone. He's essentially saying, I will be the one who makes the ultimate judgment.
It's another way he's aligning himself with divine authority, and then there's the claim about having power over life and death.
Exactly. In John chapter 11, verses 25 and 26, Jesus declares, "I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die."
Wow.
To claim to be the very source of resurrection, to have the power over life and death itself, that's not something any ordinary human could claim.
That's an incredible statement. It goes right to the heart of who has ultimate power and authority over existence.
It does. And the Jewish understanding was that God is the giver of life and the one who has conquered death yet. Yet Jesus says, "I am the resurrection and the life." And then he backs up this claim with powerful actions like raising Lazarus from the dead after he had been in the tomb for 4 days, and ultimately through his own resurrection from the dead.
Those miracles weren't just random acts. They were demonstrations of the very power he claimed to possess. Now, another interesting point in the material is that Jesus allowed people to worship him.
Right.
Why is that significant?
This is a really crucial point throughout the Old Testament, and consistently in Jewish tradition, worship is reserved solely for God. There's a clear distinction between God and humanity. In Exodus chapter 20, verses 3 through 5, the 10 Commandments begin with the instruction to have no other gods before God and not to bow down and worship idols.
Right. It's a fundamental principle. God alone is worthy of worship.
Exactly. And there are instances in the New Testament itself where angels and even the Apostle Peter refuse worship when people try to offer it to them. They know that worship belongs only to God. But with Jesus, we see a different pattern. After he walked on water, as recorded in Matthew chapter 14, verse 33, the disciples saw this incredible miracle, and their response was to worship him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God."
And crucially, Jesus didn't tell them to stop. He didn't say, "Don't worship me, worship God." He accepted their adoration.
That's the key. His acceptance implies that he knew he was worthy of that worship. Then you have the powerful encounter with Thomas in John chapter 20, verses 28 and 29, after seeing the resurrected Jesus. Thomas exclaims, "My Lord and my God." This is a very direct and personal declaration of Jesus' divinity from one of his closest followers.
That's about as explicit as it gets, "My Lord and my God."
It is. And again, Jesus doesn't rebuke Thomas. Instead, he affirms his faith, saying, "Because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed." If Jesus were just a human teacher or a prophet, accepting such a profound declaration of deity would be unthinkable. It would be a violation of the core principle of worshiping God alone.
It really highlights his understanding of his own identity and his relationship with God. Finally, the material brings up how Jesus' enemies themselves understood his claims.
Yeah.
How does their reaction shed light on this question?
This is a really important piece of evidence. If Jesus never claimed to be God, why would the Jewish religious leaders go to such extreme measures to accuse him of blasphemy and ultimately seek his crucifixion? Their actions reveal how they interpreted his words and deeds. They clearly understood him to be making claims about his divine nature.
So it wasn't just that they disagreed with his interpretation of the law they felt. He was making a claim that was fundamentally against their understanding of God and humanity.
Exactly. Think back to John chapter 10, verses 30 through 33. Jesus plainly states, "I and the Father are one." The immediate response of the Jewish leaders is to pick up stones to stone him. When Jesus asks them why they are doing this, they reply, "We're not stoning you for any good work, but for blasphemy, because you, a mere man, claim to be God." They understood perfectly that his statement, "I and the Father are one," was a claim to divine equality.
There was no misunderstanding on their part. They saw it as a direct claim to be God, and for a human to make that claim was, in their view, the ultimate blasphemy.
And this all culminates in his trial before the Sanhedrin, as described in Mark chapter 14, verses 61 through 64. The high priest asks Jesus directly under oath, "Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One?" Jesus' answer is a clear and unambiguous "I am," followed by a further statement about seeing the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming with the clouds of heaven, imagery directly linked to divine power and glory in their scriptures.
And the high priest's reaction is immediate and dramatic. He tears his robes, a symbolic act of outrage, and declares, "Why do we need any more witnesses? You have heard the blasphemy." Their condemnation of Jesus was based on their understanding that he was claiming to be divine.
Precisely so. When you put all of this together, his use of the divine name "I am," his claims to do things only God can do, like forgiving sins and judging the world, his acceptance of worship, and the reaction of his enemies who clearly understood his claims to be divine and condemned him for it, a very consistent and compelling picture emerges.
It really does. It's not just one isolated statement. It's a pattern of words and actions that point to a profound understanding of his own identity. To quickly recap, we've seen how Jesus used God's sacred name for himself, how he claimed to forgive sins and judge actions understood to be God's alone, how he accepted worship, and how even his adversaries recognized his claims as divine and sought to punish him for them.
That's a great summary, and it brings to mind the famous trilemma posed by C.S. Lewis, who argued that when we consider Jesus' claims, he could only have been one of three things: a liar, a lunatic, or Lord.
Right.
The weight of these claims really leaves no neutral ground.
Exactly. He doesn't really give us the option of just saying, "Oh, he was a nice, harmless teacher."
Right.
If these claims are true, they have massive implications for how we see him and how we respond to him.
They certainly do. If Jesus truly is who he said he was, if he is God in human form, then what he taught, what he did, and the sacrifice he made take on an entirely new level of significance if he claimed to be God, and then validated that claim through his resurrection, then he is indeed worthy of our trust, our devotion, and our worship.
So maybe the question we need to wrestle with isn't just a historical one, did Jesus claim to be God?
Yeah.
But a much more personal one. If he did, what does that mean for me? Will I believe him?
That's really the heart of the matter. Jesus himself asked his disciples a similar question in Matthew chapter 16, verse 15. But what about you? Who do you say I am?
Yeah.
It's a question that resonates down through the centuries, and it's one each of us needs to answer in our own lives.
So as we finish this deep dive, we want to leave you with a challenge. It's a simple three-part invitation to think more deeply about this. First, take one of the passages we discussed today, maybe John chapter 8, verse 58, or Mark chapter 2, verses 5 to 7, or John chapter 10, verses 30 to 33, and read it carefully. Ask yourself, what is Jesus really saying about himself in these words?
Second, reflect, take some time to really think about the implications.
Okay.
If Jesus did claim to be God, what does that mean for your understanding of God, of Jesus, and of yourself? And finally, consider your response.
Okay.
If you believe that Jesus is who he claimed to be, how might that truth shape your life, your decisions, and your relationship with him?
We'd love to hear your thoughts and questions as you explore this further. You can connect with us on social media using the hashtag #WhoDoYouSayJesus is.
And if you found this deep dive into Jesus' claims helpful, please take a moment to like this discussion, share it with someone who might be interested, and subscribe to Rooted in Reason so you don't miss our future explorations into faith and thoughtful inquiry.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for being here.